When I talk about democratic socialism, I'm not looking at Venezuela. I'm not looking at Cuba. I'm looking at countries like Denmark and Sweden. And I think we should look to countries like Denmark, like Sweden and Norway, and learn from what they have accomplished for their working people.
Since Bernie's presidential run, memes like this have been used as proof that America is terrible and oppressive, and that, thanks to an especially tasty flavor of socialism, there really is a utopia on Earth. And since the Burnmeister's run, democratic socialism has become a leftist buzzword for how great socialism is when it's done right, and basically being synonymous with Nordic countries, especially Denmark. But it's all smoke and mirrors, because putting democratic in front of socialism doesn't change that socialism's immoral and stupid, and because Denmark's not a friggin' socialist country, democratic or otherwise. Denmark's a capitalist country with a huge welfare state. That's it. And just a glance at their economic system shows businesses there actually have less government bureaucracy and regulation to put up with than businesses in the US do. And by the way, Denmark has a much lower corporate tax rate. When Denmark's Prime Minister spoke at Harvard School of Government back in late 2015, he demystified the democratic socialism nonsense by saying, quote, "I know that some people in the U.S. associate the Nordic model with some sort of socialism. Therefore, I'd like to make one thing clear. Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy." End quote. So now that that's out of the way, there's their expanded welfare state. Isn't all the free stuff Danes get killer, and shouldn't the U.S. copy that model? Well, I'll say this. Denmark's a perfect example of how right Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman was when he said, "There's no such thing as a free lunch." And here's why. Denmark's payroll and income taxes are about the world's highest. And because they need to raise a ton of revenue to pay for all the free stuff, also really flat. Which means, even though they have a progressive tax system, most people are taxed at a high tax rate, not just wealthier people. And unlike in the US, a high tax rate kicks in at a rock bottom income level. So even people who make just a little pay a lot. Income above $7,000 a year is taxed at about 40%, and the top marginal tax rate, which is 60%, kicks in at earnings of over only the equivalent of $53,000 a year.
But wait! There's more! Hang on to your seat, baby, cause this one's a screamer!
Sales tax is 25%. Let me repeat that. Sales tax is 25%. And that applies to basically all goods and services, including gas and electric for your home. And of course, this is a regressive tax, which means poorer people who spend a larger portion of their income are affected more than wealthier people. And no, you can't get around the tax by buying stuff online. Even a birthday gift that, say, a relative living abroad sends you is subject to the tax. So instead of a box, you'll get a bill for 25% of the estimated value of what's in the box, and a letter telling you that your box is at the post office where you can pay the bill. So in Denmark, you can go broke by getting too many birthday presents.
But wait, there's more. I'd like to get a hash brown. And do I have to pay separate shipping and handling on that?
No, you don't.
Oh, okay. But I'm still not done.
Denmark also has a ton of special taxes, like the 180% tax on the purchase of a car. This and other ridiculously inflated car-related costs puts owning a car out of reach for most Danes. That's why only a third of households in Denmark have a car, compared to 91% of American households. Even in the busy capital of Copenhagen, bikes outnumber cars on the road. And if you're romanticizing this whole bike culture thing, imagine riding your bike to work in the rain, in the cold, with a headache from drinking too much overtaxed beer the night before. You won't see that image on a tourism brochure. Sorry, silly rabbit, but bicycles are for communists and kids. Although there's no government-mandated federal minimum wage in Denmark, because of unions and supply and demand, entry-level fast food employees do make about $20 an hour. And because that compresses the wages, Denmark has a higher income equality than the US. But, there's that pesky but again, but the average annual wage in Denmark is still lower than the average annual wage in the US. And in case you're wondering, the wealthiest 10% in Denmark control about the same percentage of their country's wealth as the top 10% do in America. So, considering the high taxes and high starting wages, it makes sense that everything costs more in Denmark. Restaurant and bar prices are outrageous, and for the average Dane, eating out is a luxury and reserved for special occasions. Even though Denmark's North Sea oil reserves make it the second largest oil producer in the EU, gasoline prices are 3 times higher than in the US. Food costs more, clothes cost a lot more, and the price of housing in Denmark is about double that of the US. And the utility prices are stupid high. Denmark also has the world's highest water prices, and all the head of the Danish Water and Wastewater Supply Association has to say about that is, quote, "We can see that Danes are saving more water, so expensive water leads us to conserve it. I can go on and on about the prices, but the bottom line is the cost of living there is higher and the purchasing power is lower." Something else in judging Denmark's welfare state is Denmark didn't become a rich country after introducing universal welfare funded by high taxes, but when it was a low-tax country with a small public sector. As a matter of fact, Denmark economically overtook Europe in the 50s and was closing the gap with the US up until the early 1970s. So right after their welfare state expansion, the catching up process ended.
The major political parties on the center-left and the center-right would oppose many of the proposals of Bernie Sanders on the regulatory side as being too leftist. Top marginal tax in Denmark is 59% of your income. So we are paying quite a bit for the services we are getting. So it's not for free. I do believe that the size of the government, in terms of how much taxes we have to pay, means that it's putting brakes on economic growth. I think that is clearly the case.
How do you feel about handing more than half of your paycheck over to the government?
We're quite furious on a personal level.
Right now, poverty and homelessness in Denmark is going up, and will continue to go up if trends don't change. That being said, Denmark does have a lower poverty rate than the US, but I think it has less to do with their expanded welfare state than people think, but more to do with their culture that's always emphasized social cohesion and individual responsibility. And to wrap this up, you don't have to look too hard at any of their welfare programs to see big cracks in the system. For example, take taxpayer-funded higher education. Even though the government actually pays kids about $1,000 a month while attending free college, educational mobility in Denmark is no better than in the US. The kids of college grads almost always go to college, the kids of non-grads usually don't. And only a tiny share of Denmark's college grad population comes from homes where neither parent finished high school. Also, the US ranks above Denmark in the percentage of adults with a bachelor's degree or better. One of the biggest arguments for tuition-free university in the US is student loans put them in debt early in life. And yeah, loans put people in debt. So you'd think Danes have less debt, especially since most don't have cars, so no car loan debt either. But in fact, Danes still manage to get much deeper into personal debt than people in the US do, probably because they have to spend so much of their income on taxes. The OECD puts Denmark at number 1 in the world with 321% creditor debt to disposable personal income. The US is in much better shape at 114%. And like the consumption tax, taxpayer-funded university is another regressive tax. Although everybody has to pay this tax, the majority of people that go to university in Denmark, like in the US, are people who come from middle-income to higher-income class families. A recent Pell Institute report shows not much has changed since 1970. 50% of university grads come from the top quarter of the income class, and only 10% come from the bottom quarter. So this government program imposes taxes on lower income people to finance the schooling of people who are or will be in the higher income group. I'll just end my little critique here so not to lose sight of the forest for the trees, which is that the Enlightenment principle of individual liberty should trump all. In a free country, the individual's life belongs to him, not to society, and not to the state to fulfill someone else's notion of greater good. Having lived and worked in the EU, I think if you prefer the security of your parents' home over venturing out on your own, and you're willing to let your liberty be restricted for that security, you might be happy in Denmark. But don't just assume you will be, as 1 in 11 Danes are on antidepressants, and the suicide rate is higher than in the US. Being forced to spend a huge amount of what I earn on things I didn't choose to buy isn't my idea of happiness. Neither is being unjustly fined for choosing to buy things that do make me happy, like a steak dinner at a decent restaurant or a cool car.
What?
Whose car is that out front?
Mine. 1970 Pontiac Firebird, the car I've always wanted, and now I have it. I rule!